There's a moment that comes to all of us, usually in the dead of night when the world has gone silent and there's nothing left to distract us from ourselves. It's that moment when a thought creeps in, one you've been pushing away for days, weeks, maybe even years. And suddenly, you're face to face with it. The thought you've been running from. The one that makes you question who you really are. What happens when you stop running? What happens when you turn around and face your darkest thoughts head on? Most people never do it. They can't. The fear is too great. Because these aren't just random anxieties or passing worries. These are the thoughts that reveal something deeper about ourselves, the impulses we're ashamed of, the desires we've buried, the truths we've hidden even from our own consciousness. We've all felt it. That flash of anger so intense you scared yourself. That moment of jealousy that made you realize you're capable of wishing harm on someone you claim to care about. That fleeting thought of just walking away from everything and everyone, consequences be damned. These thoughts don't make us monsters. They make us human. But acknowledging them? That's where things get complicated. There's a reason we lock these thoughts away in the deepest corners of our minds. Society has taught us well. We've learned to wear masks, to present ourselves as good, decent, moral people. And mostly, we are. But beneath that carefully constructed surface, there's another version of ourselves, raw, unfiltered, and operating by a completely different set of rules. It's the part of us that exists before we've had time to censor ourselves. Before we've applied the layers of socialization and ethics and fear of judgment. And when that part speaks up, when it whispers its truths in the quiet moments, we panic. We shove it back down. We change the subject in our own heads. We reach for our phones, turn on the TV, call a friend, anything to avoid listening. But here's what nobody tells you about those dark thoughts. They don't go away just because you ignore them. In fact, they grow stronger. They accumulate power in the shadows. And eventually, they start affecting your life in ways you don't even recognize. That inexplicable anxiety? That feeling of being disconnected from yourself? That sense that you're playing a role in your own life rather than actually living it. Often, it comes from the energy we expend keeping our darkest thoughts at bay. We become so focused on not thinking certain things, on not being certain ways, that we lose touch with who we actually are beneath all the suppression. 500 years ago, a man named Niccolo Machiavelli sat in exile, stripped of his political power, and wrote something that would scandalize Europe for centuries. In his book The Prince, he didn't write about how rulers should behave according to moral ideals or religious principles. Instead, he wrote about how they actually behave when power and survival are on the line. He described the dark calculus of leadership, when to use cruelty, how to manipulate public opinion, why it's sometimes necessary to break your word, how fear can be more useful than love. The book was considered so dangerous, so morally corrupting, that it was placed on the papal index of prohibited books. People were horrified. Not because Machiavelli was lying, but because he was telling the truth. He was saying out loud what everyone already knew but pretended not to. He was facing the dark thoughts of politics and power and refusing to look away. And here's the thing about Machiavelli that makes him relevant to this moment, to your moment, to the moment when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning confronting thoughts you wish you didn't have. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for evil. He was advocating for reality. He was saying, look at the world as it actually is, not as you wish it were. Look at yourself as you actually are, not as you pretend to be. Because only when you see clearly can you make real choices. Only when you acknowledge the darkness can you decide what to do with it. Machiavelli understood something profound, that denying the darker aspects of human nature doesn't make them disappear. It just makes them unconscious, uncontrolled, and ultimately more dangerous. When you face your darkest thoughts, really face them, something unexpected happens. The first thing you feel is fear. Pure, primal fear. Because you're convinced that if you look directly at these thoughts, if you allow yourself to truly examine them, they'll consume you. You're afraid you'll discover that you're actually a terrible person. That the dark thoughts represent your true nature, and everything else is just pretense. That if you open that door, you won't be able to close it again. This fear is so powerful that most people never get past it. They peek through the crack, see the darkness, and slam the door shut immediately. Better not to know, they think. Better to keep pretending. But if you push through that initial fear, if you force yourself to sit with the discomfort and actually examine what's there, you begin to notice something surprising. These dark thoughts? They're not as dark as you imagined. Or rather, they're dark, but they're not all of you. They're one part of a complex inner landscape. They're not your essence, they're just thoughts. Impulses. Evolutionary remnants. Psychological responses to pain or fear or desire. When you look at them directly, when you allow them to exist without immediately judging or suppressing them, they lose some of their power. The monster in the closet is always more terrifying before you turn on the light. Let me tell you what I mean. Imagine you've been harboring resentment toward someone close to you, or a parent, a friend, a partner. Not just mild irritation, but deep, corrosive resentment. Maybe even hatred. And you've been telling yourself you don't feel that way, that you shouldn't feel that way, that good people don't harbor such intense negative emotions toward people they're supposed to love. So you suppress it. You perform love. You go through the motions. But the resentment is always there, underneath, poisoning everything. Making you feel guilty. Making you feel fake. Making every interaction exhausting because you're constantly monitoring yourself, making sure the darkness doesn't leak out. Now imagine you finally stop fighting it. You sit down and you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to feel this fully. I'm going to admit that I resent this person. I'm going to explore why. You let the feeling wash over you without immediately trying to fix it or explain it away. And here's what happens, you start to understand it. You realize the resentment comes from feeling controlled, or undervalued, or hurt by something that happened years ago. You realize it's not just random darkness, it's a response to real experiences. It's information. And once you understand it, once you've given it space to exist and speak its truth, you can actually do something with it. You can decide whether to address the underlying issue, set boundaries, have a difficult conversation, or even choose to let go and move on. But none of that is possible when you're using all your energy just to pretend the feeling doesn't exist. This is what Machiavelli understood about power and what we need to understand about ourselves. Denial doesn't work. Pretending doesn't work. You cannot make effective decisions about your life if you're operating from a false understanding of who you are. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must learn how not to be good when necessary, not because goodness itself is bad, but because a leader who pretends the world is fair and people are always honest and goodness always prevails will be destroyed by those who understand reality more clearly. In the same way, a person who pretends they don't have dark thoughts, selfish impulses, capacity for cruelty, or shadow aspects of personality will be controlled by those very things precisely because they refuse to acknowledge them. The shadow self. This is what Carl Jung called it decades later. The parts of ourselves we reject, deny, repress. Jung argued that the shadow doesn't disappear when we ignore it. Instead, it goes underground. It influences us from the unconscious. It comes out sideways in passive-aggressive behavior, in projection, where we see in others the qualities we can't accept in ourselves, in sudden explosions of emotion that seem to come out of nowhere, in self-sabotage, in addictions, in patterns we repeat again and again without understanding why. The shadow is still there, still operating, but now we've lost any conscious ability to work with it or integrate it or direct it. Facing your darkest thoughts is essentially the process of making the unconscious conscious. Of bringing the shadow into the light. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it requires courage. Because you will discover things about yourself that challenge your self-image. You will have to admit to desires and feelings that don't align with who you think you are or who you want to be. You might discover you're more selfish than you thought, or more ambitious, or more vengeful, or more afraid. You might discover you have the capacity for cruelty, for manipulation, for cowardice. You might find jealousy, greed, lust for power, pleasure in others' misfortune. All those things we're not supposed to feel. But here's the crucial point, the thing that changes everything. Acknowledging these capacities within yourself doesn't mean acting on them. This is what people misunderstand about the process. They think, if I admit I have these dark thoughts, if I face these impulses, then I'm giving them permission to control me. But the opposite is true. When you deny something exists, you can't control it. It controls you. When you acknowledge it, when you bring it into conscious awareness, you suddenly have choice. You can observe the impulse without being compelled by it. You can feel the anger without lashing out. You can notice the jealousy without acting destructively. You can recognize the selfish desire without automatically pursuing it. Machiavelli would understand this perfectly. In The Prince, he describes how a ruler must be both a lion and a fox, strong enough to frighten wolves, clever enough to avoid traps. He must know how to use cruelty effectively, but also when mercy serves better. He must understand the dark arts of power, not to become a tyrant, but to survive in a world where others have no such scruples. The key is consciousness. The skilled prince knows what he's capable of and chooses strategically. The unskilled prince either denies his capacity for darkness and becomes a victim, or acts from darkness unconsciously and becomes a monster. The same applies to us. Acknowledge your capacity for darkness, and you gain the ability to choose not to act from it. Deny it, and it chooses for you. Think about the people in your life who seem unable to admit fault, who never apologize, who always blame others for their problems. They're not doing this because they've faced their darkness and chosen to embrace it. They're doing it because they haven't faced it at all. Their ego is so fragile, their self-image so dependent on being perfect or blameless or victimized, that they cannot allow themselves to see their own contribution to problems. So their dark side, their cruelty, their selfishness, their manipulativeness, operates completely unconsciously. They hurt people while genuinely believing they're the ones being hurt. They destroy relationships while convinced everyone else is the problem. This is the real danger of unfaced darkness. Not that you'll become consciously evil, but that you'll do harm unconsciously while maintaining the fiction that you're purely good. Now think about the people you really respect, the ones with genuine integrity and depth. Chances are, they're not the ones who claim to be perfect or who present themselves as having no dark side. They're the ones who've clearly grappled with their own demons and come out the other side with self-awareness and humility. They can admit when they're wrong. They can acknowledge their flaws. They can laugh at themselves. They can extend genuine compassion to others who are struggling because they know intimately what it's like to struggle with yourself. They've been down into their own darkness and returned, and that journey has given them something that people who stay on the surface never develop: genuine self-knowledge and, paradoxically, the ability to be truly good rather than just performing goodness. So what actually happens when you face your darkest thoughts? Let me walk you through the process as it unfolds, because it's not a single moment but a journey with distinct phases. First comes the recognition. You notice a thought, a feeling, an impulse that disturbs you. Instead of immediately pushing it away, you pause. You acknowledge it's there. This alone is difficult. Your mind will offer 1,000 distractions. Your heart will race. Every instinct will tell you to look away. But you don't. You stay with it. Second comes the examination. You look at this dark thought clearly. What is it, exactly? Where does it come from? If it's anger, what are you angry about? If it's jealousy, what do you feel you lack? If it's a desire for revenge, what wound are you trying to heal? You approach it with curiosity rather than judgment. You become an investigator of your own psyche. This is harder than it sounds because we're trained to judge ourselves constantly. We experience a dark thought and immediately label ourselves as bad people. But judgment shuts down understanding. Curiosity opens it up. So you ask questions instead of rendering verdicts. Third comes the acceptance. This doesn't mean approval or celebration. It means acknowledging that this thought, this feeling, this impulse is part of your current psychological reality. It exists. Fighting its existence doesn't make it go away, it just exhausts you. So you accept it the way you might accept any other fact about reality. The sky is blue. Water is wet. I have this dark thought. It simply is. And here's where something shifts. When you stop fighting the thought, when you stop using all your energy trying to suppress it or deny it or escape from it, that energy becomes available for something else. For understanding. For choice. For growth. Fourth comes the integration. This is the most complex phase and the one that takes the longest. Integration means finding a way to incorporate your understanding of your shadow self into your overall sense of identity. You're not just a good person who occasionally has bad thoughts that don't count. You're a complex human being capable of both light and darkness, and your character is defined not by the absence of dark impulses but by how you choose to handle them. This is Machiavelli's insight applied inward. The virtuous person isn't the one who has no capacity for vice. It's the one who has that capacity and consciously chooses virtue anyway. The choice only means something if a real alternative exists. Integration also means learning to channel the energy of your dark side in productive ways. That anger you've been suppressing? Maybe it contains important information about boundaries that have been violated, about injustices that need addressing, about situations you need to leave. That aggression you're ashamed of? Maybe it's actually drive, ambition, the fire you need to pursue your goals and stand up for yourself. That selfish desire for recognition? Maybe it's pointing to legitimate needs for appreciation and validation that you've been denying yourself. The darkness isn't always just darkness. Sometimes it's misunderstood light. Sometimes it's energy that needs to be transformed rather than eliminated. Machiavelli talks in The Prince about how fortresses can be both useful and dangerous. A ruler who relies too much on fortresses rather than the love of his people may find himself trapped inside his own defenses. This is an almost perfect metaphor for our psychological fortresses, the defensive structures we build to protect ourselves from our own dark thoughts. At first, they seem necessary. They keep the darkness contained. But over time, we realize we're the ones who've been trapped. We're living in a constricted way, constantly maintaining these inner walls, unable to access parts of our own psyche, unable to move freely through our own emotional landscape. Facing the darkness means dismantling some of those fortresses. And yes, that's frightening. But it's also liberating. The journey of facing your darkest thoughts isn't a one-time event. It's not something you do once and then you're done, enlightened, completely integrated forever. It's an ongoing practice, a continual returning to honesty with yourself. New layers of darkness emerge as you grow. New circumstances reveal capacities you didn't know you had. The work is never truly finished. But each time you choose to face what's there rather than run from it,